Good afternoon. I'm Sjoukje Hemelvara. I'm from Wageningen, and I'm really happy to see you all here today. It's my honor and my pleasure to welcome you on this Mansholt Lecture, which is by now a fine tradition. And we aim with this Mansholt Lecture to inspire you on agenda-setting topics, drawing from the broad knowledge present in Wageningen University Research. Today we want to show you what the potential is of the worldwide food systems to restore and protect biodiversity. And biodiversity is threatened, as you all know, by climate, but at the same time, by climate change, to be precise. And at the same time, it is so needed to adapt to climate change and to ensure that our global food supply is secured, and forest and nature. Having a background in plant breeding, I know all too well that we need genetic diversity to adapt to stress or disturbance. And be it a plant, an animal, or a microbe, to survive disease, pests, predation, or salinity, droughts, or heat, we need this genetic diversity. We need biodiversity. And let's be clear, climate change is undeniable. We can see it nowadays in Europe and in the world globally. We see forest fires in France, wheat harvest failing in India, dramatic flooding in Pakistan affecting millions. And although droughts and heat is of all years, the frequency with which it happens nowadays is not. In 2009, Johan Rockström, together with a group of leading scientists, described the limits of this planet which are in danger of being breached. And they described several. They described 3 limits which concern our atmosphere: the CO2 levels rising, leading to climate change, aerosol pollution, and ozone depletion. He described 3 affecting our water systems: ocean acidification, chemical pollution, and freshwater scarcity we have all experienced this summer. And 3 of them concern our land and land use. We see disturbances of the nitrogen and phosphate cycles. We see deforestation due to pressure on land use and loss of biodiversity. And their paper in 2009 was a call to action, because we cannot cross these boundaries with impunity. And recently, the same group of authors published another paper, another call to action, in which they really addressed policymakers and asked them to take these boundaries serious, and also to take up in their thinking the worst case scenarios, because we have to act now. Climate change and biodiversity are 2 results, unwanted results, of these limits, of crossing these limits. And today we will address what can be done to mitigate the biodiversity loss and in that way make the planet more resilient to climate change. Last year, Wolfgang Bucher reflected here at the Mansholt Lezing about the EU policy and commanded us not to build castles in the air, but to take action. And we indeed want to do that. But in order to do that, we cannot act alone. We can only address biodiversity, climate change, that food security, that major topics, if we work together. And in the Mansholt Lezing of 219, we talked about the need for changing our diet, to go to a protein transition, a more plant-based diet, to mitigate the adverse effects of our food systems as they are now. And today we will set out pathways and tipping points for nature-positive futures that could enable the food system to become a major game changer in addressing the interconnected challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. As a European, I'm trying to get my hair behind my microphone. This is not very wise. As a European Commissioner of Agriculture, Sikko Mansholt, a Wageningen alumnus, began formulating agricultural policy for the European Union in the 1950s, addressing two major topics that were urgent then: food scarcity and or the threat of food scarcity, and a viable livelihood for European farmers. And the implementation of his policy has been very successful. Europe has become a very prosperous food producer and a net exporter of food. But when implemented, it also became clear that this intensification of our agricultural system does have adverse effects, because the food systems as they are now do seriously contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, to deforestation, and to loss of biodiversity, the topic of today. Yesterday, the 4-yearly State of the World Bird Report was released, reporting that 49% of all bird species are in decline, and 1 in 8 is even threatened with extinction. And the world food systems have a role in this, a negative role. Siggo Mansholt was successful in achieving his original goals on with his agricultural policy. But following retirement, he also started to see the negative sides of this intensification. And he started about lobbying to adjust this policy towards a more sustainable agriculture. And it is on this path that we want to set out with the Mansholt Lectures, the path to sustainability. And we aim to provide inspiration for the realization of the European Green Deal and the implementation of the biodiversity and the farm-to-fork strategy. The journey into a nature-positive future will not be easy. It will require courageous leadership and sectoral collaboration in a continuously changing world. The lecture today reveals that Europe is already cultivating the seeds of change, and the collaborations that are needed to go forward are already forged. And at WUR, our motto is finding answers together, and we do believe that together with science, businesses, policy and society, we must become traveling partners upon this journey. One of the issues that will be addressed today is the effect or the effectiveness of legislation on change, when we want to achieve change. And in that context, I would like to point to Etsy and Porter, who have written a paper about this, about the correlation of strict ecological legislation and competitiveness of countries. And they describe that there is a positive correlation between strict ecological legislation and country scale competitiveness, so also on country scale economic prosperity. Their theory is that by applying strict regulations, you challenge the individual companies to get future-proof, to adapt to what is coming towards us. And in that way, they see that the companies in the country, they differentiate between those that can innovate and change themselves and the others. But on a country scale, and this is what I think is important today, in the end, it is beneficial for the total of the country. Our role of WUR, Wageningen University Research, is not governance or legislation, but it is to actively contribute to the knowledge that is needed on every step of this way. Today, we hope, is one such step towards a nature-positive future. We will be there and we will want to help. We will work towards the UN Climate Change Conference COP27 in November and the UN Biodiversity Conference COP15 in December. So, while I'm genuinely concerned about life on this planet, I'm also really optimistic. Optimistic about the resilience of our planet and the resilience of humanity. And I am convinced that if you will have heard Liesje Mommer today, you will share some of my optimism. So I would like to introduce you to Liesje Mommer, our speaker of today. She is a plant ecologist working for years in the field of biodiversity ecosystem functioning. And together with her team, she's one of the 20 most cited WER scientists, and we have more than 6,000. Next to being a scientist, she leads the Wageningen Biodiversity Initiative. And this team wants to show how we can close the gap that is perceived between ecology and agriculture, among others. Liesje is inspired by the diversity of disciplines that are present on the Wageningen campus. And she is convinced that by integrating these disciplines and this knowledge, we can lead a tipping point towards a better future. Today, Liesje will aim to inspire you in order to enable a fruitful dialogue, as she believes that we can do this together. We can make it happen. Liesje.
Thank you, Sjoukje. Thank you for setting the stage so nicely. Dear members of the European Commission and national representatives, dear representatives of the food industry, finance, and business, dear farmers and nature lovers, dear scientists, dear all. Today, I will take you along on a journey into a nature-positive future, and we from WER, will support you on this journey to catalyze transformative change into a better world for the people and for the planet. Before I dive deeper into this topic, I would like to dedicate this lecture to these two children, my children, but also to your children and theirs, as they are the future. They deserve a future, a nature-positive future. It's for them that we have to do better, much better, as the world is in an alarming state. We have all experienced it last summer, the hot summer of 2022. Extreme droughts, heat waves, burning forests, dying crops. Also events of storm and heavy rainfalls leading to severe flood. Climate change was here, in our midst, right in our face. What we are not, or at least less talking about, is biodiversity loss. The dramatic decline of insects and the loss of coral reefs. And increased numbers, as Sjoukje already said, of endangered species, not only the birds. Important to realize is that biodiversity loss and climate change are two sides of the same coin. They are both the result of our human activities. We are overexploiting the Earth and overriding planetary boundaries. And these two crises, biodiversity loss and climate change, are reinforcing each other. There are strong feedback loops. Climate change leads to biodiversity loss, and biodiversity loss enforces climate change. In other words, we need biodiversity. We need nature to mitigate climate change. Biodiversity is our safety net, or at least it was our safety net, as it is breaking apart. Our food system, the way we produce and what we produce, plays a major role in this breakdown, in climate change and in biodiversity loss. The extent and rate at which we cut down our forests is beyond imagination. Agriculture is responsible for 80% of the global deforestation, which results in losing the incredible variation of life inhabiting these forests, and is also disrupting climate patterns. And this is further reinforced because having agriculture on these soils puts in more greenhouse gas emissions, further accelerating climate change. And in addition, globally, more than half of our agricultural lands is degraded, representing a huge loss of productivity for agriculture and also a loss of biodiversity. So, the food system is a key driver of biodiversity loss and climate change. However, what we often do not realize is that the food system will be the first and biggest victim of this overexploitation. You all remember the dying crops on the fields in this super hot summer. And many crops, fruits and vegetables in particular, need insect pollinators to produce food. And crops on degraded soil will be more vulnerable to pests and diseases. We face an enormous challenge. So, how can we turn the tide? How can the food system be part of the solution rather than the problem? Mr. Butcher, the Director General of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development from the European Union, visited the Wageningen campus this spring. Here you see us discussing on a nice roundtable conversation. And he asked us this question straight in the face. How can the food system be part of the solution? And his question inspired this lecture, the process that led us to this journey today. The process of this journey where we are all here together in the room, are all part of. And this process will also continue after today, after this lecture. And biodiversity is key. Diversity is key. We will need to reintroduce biodiversity in our food system, in a diversity of approaches and with a diversity of stakeholders. We will need to work with nature rather than against it. Biodiversity is what binds us together. Nature-positive food systems can contribute to mitigating climate change and biodiversity loss. It will also contribute to the livelihood of the planet, to food security, human health, and well-being of all. There's no single solution, neither a simple one. And that is why we set out on a process with all our colleagues and students from Wageningen University Research. More than 150 people contributed their knowledge, expertise, and hope. In addition, we received input from policymakers here in Brussels. And together we explored the pathways. Into a nature-positive food system. What is already going on? What seeds of change are already around? What is already happening? And how can we support these initiatives? How can we accelerate embedding of biodiversity in the food system? Together, we have identified many interventions that can accelerate change towards nature-positive food systems in Europe, restore biodiversity, enhance climate regulation by ecosystems. We have clustered these innovations in 5 entry points across the whole of the food system. And it is important to realize that these are all interlinked. But first, I will describe these 5 entry points one by one. And the first entry point is diverse fields and farms. Reintroducing biodiversity in the food system starts on fields and farms, with our farmers. It starts with farming with nature, embracing agroecological principles. It implies that farmers manage closed cycles and hardly use pesticides, and they will use a wider range of crops in space and time. And with bringing in diversity in agriculture, we also mean having a variety of approaches to farm with nature, and these can differ in agricultural intensity, yield, and technology. We basically say we cannot do all the same thing, but farming must become within planetary boundaries. Clear regulatory targets on inputs to stay within these boundaries, coupled with strong investments in new approaches and techniques, will boost the farmers' craftsmanship and collective learning in farmers' groups. The second entry point is biodiversed landscape and seascapes. What is done on the farm scales up to the landscape. The landscape and the seascape are connected. What is happening on the land affects the sea and vice versa. And we should care about this balance. In this entry point, space is shared with nature, for example, on farms, in cities, and in wind farms on the sea. But also space is spared for nature, in green corridors in the landscape, forest, and in nature reserves. This entry point is also about people living in their landscape, and the role of people in the governance of that, to make landscapes and seascapes diverse, multifunctional, and healthy. And the transition towards a nature-positive society is going to be intense, difficult, and tough. And we cannot leave anybody behind. We all have to eat, and thus the food system can also be a strong connector. The third entry point therefore addresses that. How to create connected communities in a world that is already so divided. In this entry point, it is about taking responsibility, learning, and fostering stewardship for the land and seascape, as well as the foodscape. We all play a role therein, as a citizen and a consumer, but some of us in the audience also take a professional role. Taking up these roles can be strongly supported if governments would take an empowering role in boosting nature-positive initiatives, dialogue, and debate. And this entry point, connected communities, is the one that is missing in the Farm to Fork and biodiversity strategy of the European Green Deal. Taking explicit public responsibility for creating connected communities is important to make sure everyone is invited to getting along. And we really hope that there are processes underway to support communities, to support community building at different scales and in different places. And related to connected communities is sustainable food and diet. It's the fourth entry point. It's about creating and stimulating healthy and sustainable food environments. People care about their health and about the environmental impacts of their food, and will make nature-positive decisions with regard to their diet. But these should become the easy choice, not be the expensive ones. And national dietary guidelines, customized to local context, can provide clear guidance for people and business on sustainable and healthy diets for people and for the planet. Yeah. These 4 points cannot make it into nature-positive futures unless there will be strong leadership in finance and trade, which is the 5th entry point. Environmental impacts should be reflected in prices of products, and negative impact of producing food should not be shifted to other parts of the world or to next generations. Safeguarding biodiversity should become explicit in global trade agreements and in regulations. And different positions and perspectives of producers and consumers are respected and included in decision-making, giving power to alternative practices, leading to a diversification of the food system, and also leading to a biodiversity of governance systems. So, these are the 5 points. Implementing combinations of interventions from these 5 entry points simultaneously can set up mutually reinforcing reactions that accelerate pathways to nature-positive food systems. These can create a perfect storm, a tipping point. But in order to invite such change, we will have to look beyond our own silos, beyond our disciplines, beyond our own business. It is our responsibility these days to oversee our part in the full chain, in the system as a whole. And also to connect with these other parts, to integrate our part in the food system and make it better, to make it nature positive and climate neutral. And here I will give one example of how such interventions can cascade into a better future. In the booklet, we give 3. The example that I give starts on field and farm. It has been demonstrated that clear policy regulations from governmental institutions to reduced inputs in agriculture will lead to innovations in the field. Creating policies to stay within planetary boundaries will inspire farmers to find new ways of farming within planetary boundaries. Please understand me correctly. I do not say that all farmers have to become organic. No. There will be a variety of options to stay within planetary boundaries and produce high quality, healthy food for all. Importantly, the innovativeness of farmers will be boosted if peer-to-peer farming, peer-to-peer learning is empowered. However, we cannot put all responsibility on our farmers. For these interventions in this entry point to become a success, there must be a demand for nature-positive food. Farmers need our support, and that can be delivered in different ways. One of the steps to do so is that national and local governments install public procurement that creates a demand for such food, for nature-positive food. Another way of doing that is if people, we all, become involved in local food initiatives to create a local demand. And local authorities can, and I think should, stimulate and empower such network building. And the involvement of the public in local food initiatives, and also if that is further empowered by providing nature-positive education at schools, this will create a shift in our diet towards a planetary diet. Talking about it with family and friends and in the neighborhood, at school, on television, will create awareness, opportunities, and responsibility. As together, we create the future. People will move away from being passive consumers to responsible citizens. They will feel connected and they will feel at home in the landscape, and a diverse, patchy landscape with space for and space with nature, restoring the safety net of biodiversity. I am fully aware that in this example that I address the positive side, the hope, the opportunities. Nice and simple. You may perceive it as simplistic and naive. However, I know, I have experienced myself how hard it is to create change for a better future. I believe it is possible if we all take responsibility. There will be many distractions, drawbacks, and moments of despair. But I challenge you to dare to do better. If we dare to do better, we can create a nature-positive future, even if it seems impossible. Nelson Mandela said it always seems impossible until it's done. It only becomes possible if we do it together. No one can do it alone. No one has the resources, the knowledge, or the power. Only together we can create nature-positive futures. So I'm really pleased that today we are together and that we have so many actors in the room. Public policy at the European and national levels, the food and finance industry, the farmers, the nature organizations. I'm looking forward to hearing about your experience of change, of hope. I hope to connect, to create momentum that will get us moving along in this journey. I want to share one more thought. Having a shared responsibility can easily result in no one taking the lead, waiting for others to take a first step. However, the time of waiting, disputing, and lingering is over. We all felt it last hot summer. And to get us on track, we have defined priority actions that you, your organizations, could lead. Should lead, maybe. It will not be easy. It will be tough. It will be hard. It will be uphill. So it will need courageous leadership. And I'm sure we all from Weur are here to help, to support and navigate into nature-positive futures. And then my son. He said this morning when I left the house to travel to Brussels, do not produce words in a booklet, but fix it. We are the generation to fix it. You and me, us. Let's get started. Let's get started connecting in the panel. Let's start the dialogue. The panel will be hosted by Jeanelle, here in the front. She is the program leader, Biodiverse Environments in Weur, and the co-author of this lecture, and a great navigator in the journey towards a nature-positive future. Jean, the floor is yours. And thank you.
Thank you, Lisha, and thank you very, very much for the introduction and the warm invitation and the very challenging invitation to all of us to be part of the change. We'll definitely be diving more into that in the panel discussion, but before we do that, I would like to ask for a reflection from the European Commission to see how governments might be thinking about this change. And to do that, I will invite Lukas Vissig to the stage. He is a member of the Cabinet of the Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans. His work at the European Union focuses especially on the farm to fork strategy, the greening of the common agriculture policy, zero pollution, and the long-term vision for rural areas. In other words, he works in this field that we're talking about. So I very warmly welcome you to the stage. We're looking forward to your reflection.
Thank you very much for the introduction and especially for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to you, everyone. I was very inspired by the lecture. It goes very much along the lines of what our thinking was when we were preparing the farm to fork and the biodiversity strategies in the Commission. This is also the thinking that we had when preparing all the legal proposals that are coming from the farm to fork and the biodiversity strategies. And this was also, some of the really grim figures that you were giving also led us to gave us energy when we were with Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans and with Commissioner Wojciechowski in the negotiations on the future common agricultural policy. So once again, thanks very much for giving these, well, to you and to the whole team, because there's been so many people who have been involved in this. I've been requested to take kind of a reflection on what's been said in the lecture and in this paper, and I'll do that. But let me take a little step back, and I will not repeat what has been said already about and which is so true, that floods are happening, droughts are happening. They've always been happening, but the problem is that they keep coming back, and every year is drier and hotter than the previous year. Every year brings a new record. And at the same time, what happens in the EU is that every quarter we actually produce more. And I'm not saying that we should be producing less. Huh? Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is that that there is a cost somewhere, and we need to be sure that we can sustain that cost. At some point, we won't be able to sustain that cost. That point is perhaps far when it comes to biodiversity, maybe not, because, as you said also very rightly, the focus has been so much on the climate crisis, and we know quite well what is going to happen if we don't manage to tame the climate within the within the 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degrees. If we go beyond that point, we know more or less what is going to happen, and we see this. We see already every year what is happening. But again, the interest in biodiversity has been a little bit. Perhaps it hasn't been such a priority, but I would compare it to I would compare it to heart attack. We know quite well what to do when someone is hit with a heart attack, and we react to it as people. We rushed into the hospital, and our life is saved. And this is exactly what happened with the response to COVID in all the policies at EU level, at national level, even at local level. This is exactly what has been happening in the response to the war, to the Russian war against Ukraine. We rush into solutions because this has been a heart attack. But when it comes to the climate crisis, and especially to the biodiversity crisis, it's a bit like high blood pressure. It is going to end up pretty much exactly at the same terrible point as a heart attack. But and we know how to treat it, but be a little bit less alarmed by this, and we should take, and I think we should take this more seriously. I think a very good example of all of this is that, in the Commission we have these periodical forecasts of the harvests. So in March, the forecast for wheat was a number X, and at the same time it kind of coincided with the with the beginning of the Russian war against Ukraine, and we calculated that because of the war, there's going to be this year about 5 million tons of wheat missing on the market. And we started talking about food security. We started scrambling for measures, and when I say we, I mean us as humanity, to prevent a terrible disaster in other parts of the world. And I repeat, this is when we were worried that 5 million tons of wheat was going to be missing from the market. Then comes the next edition of this forecast, and that was in July. So we knew that the summer was going to be dry, but we didn't know the extent of it as yet. And that revision for soft wheat was actually revised down by 6 million tons. And so we have managed to actually, negotiate, or the United Nations have managed to negotiate a safe exit of cereals from Ukraine through the Baltic Sea. We have managed to create solidarity lanes to transfer produce from Ukraine into the EU, and that was for 5 million tons. But for 6 million tons that are lost due to droughts, we completely powerless. And this is something that we have to that we still have to work on. Now, on the reflections on the entry points. First of all, let me start from the end of what has been said. As we put out in the Farm to Fork strategy, what is absolutely clear is that the change has to happen along the entire value chain. It is not possible to put the burden on farmers and say, farmers, now you start producing in a certain way, which is perfect, which is completely sustainable, and not bring consumers on the journey and not bring the middle part of the chain, everyone who is between farm to fork. In an equal way, it is not possible to tell consumers, change your diets, because that's going to make a change, which it would, but not making sure that actually the diet is supported by the way the food is produced and marketed as well. Let's not forget also about that part of the chain. That's my first point. My second point, still developing on your conclusions, that change really has to happen at all levels of public administration, but also in private lives. We in the European Commission, we can draft legislation. That's what we do, and we're very grateful that we pride ourselves for providing for drafting legislation which is backed by evidence and by facts, and we're very grateful that actually work like this is going to become part of our evidence, of our collection of evidence that serves us for making these legislative proposals. But then comes the implementation of this legislation, and the implementation is very much in the hands of member states, of national authorities, of local and regional authorities. And if we don't bring them along on this journey, then the transition is simply not going to happen. There are, of course, legal actions that can be taken, but that's not the point. We don't legislate so that we can punish. We legislate so that we can actually change the world. That should be the point. And we, of course, cannot do it without everyone who is actually part of the value chain being fully on board. And that being, and I will repeat myself again, that being farmers, that being consumers, and that being the middle part of the chain. And I think that's really the, if I should leave you with one message, that is going to be this one. We cannot dump a lot of obligations on farmers unless we all individually change our lifestyle or adapt our lifestyle to what is necessary. And let me be very clear that the European Commission, from the Berlaymont, cannot legislate how much meat should one eat or what a good diet, what a good diet is. You refer to national dietary guidelines. Those are also very different, and I think that we also have to respect that. But having said that, the EU legislation is not completely powerless on this. In fact, in very early next year, the Commission is going to put forward a set of proposals for reformulating food so that it contains less salt, it contains less fat, less sugar, and it also is going to, and I will use your words, it is also going to put forward a proposal which will make the healthy choice the easier choice, and in the future also the less expensive choice. And we'll get there. We'll get there with another proposal that is coming next year on sustainable food systems. Let me go back on your entry points, with which, of course, are the key elements of the response to the climate and the biodiversity crisis, and to ensuring that the transition is not only green but is also just, because we also need to bring the rural communities along on this journey. You were talking about you were talking in your entry point one about farmers, and you were stressing the role of knowledge, and the Netherlands is a fantastic example of how that works, and I think that we have a lot to learn from that, and this is also what we try to put into the proposal on the sustainable use of pesticides, by which we would like to replace 50% of chemical pesticides with, and then with many things, with alternatives, with knowledge, with maybe no pesticides at all. But all that requires effort, again, at all levels. It requires efforts from farmers to actually get that knowledge. It requires an effort from farming communities and from farming organizations to actually be able to assist to farmers with the provision of the knowledge, and of course national authorities who are responsible for the advisory services. In your number 2 point, entry point, you were talking about people in landscapes, and I think you said that this is missing in the biodiversity strategy and in the farm to fork strategy. And in a way, I think you might have a point. What we try to develop is something that's called the long-term vision for rural areas, so that we actually give a prospect to people living in rural areas. And I think a good example comes from countries like Italy or France, where they create these biodistricts. So it's entire communities which actually farm in an organic way, and then it's an example how the community comes together and actually creates a business case for their farmers, for their citizens, in the context of tourism, in the context of a healthier place to live and of better jobs. Third point is about connected communities, and I think that's also a very related concept, where through the LEADER program in the Common Agricultural Policy, we try to create these communities so that it's a proper bottom-up approach, and the needs that need to be addressed at local level are actually properly supported. Fourth point that you've made is about caring about food, and I think that's that might be the key point really in the whole thing for actually triggering the change. I think if we start caring about food just as much as we care for other things in our lives, I think that the transition will happen much faster. And the final point, and I'm coming to the end of my reflections, is about trade and the international dimension. And there, we are in a situation where, for example, with pesticides, there's a number of them that we ban in the EU, but we still produce them, we export them, and then we import the products that have been treated with these pesticides. And that's something that very recently the Commission has tried to put an end to with bringing what's called the maximum residue level down to zero, so that practice is no longer possible, because we cannot just be responsible for the environment in the EU and neglecting the environment outside of the EU. Let me end on two points. First of all, and that's a very short one, this, what you have presented cannot only be a wish. It has to be, it has to make sense also financially. There has to be a business case. And the good news is that, not only this is really in the interest of everyone, all of us, to actually invest and undertake this transition, because otherwise we finished, we fried, and pun intended on that, but it also makes a lot of sense financially. In our impact assessment on the nature restoration law, we have calculated that every euro invested in biodiversity has a return on investment between 8 to 38 euros. So it makes a huge sense to invest in biodiversity. And the final point, and I've kind of hinted on that already, and I think that came out quite clearly from the lecture as well, is let's not fool ourselves that that we would be doing this for the planet. Planet will be perfectly fine without us, probably better off. We're doing this for ourselves. It's a question of our own survival, and I think we should all remember that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucas. May I ask you to take a seat? Thank you very much. That gives us a nice way to kick off the panel. There we go. And to dig into some of the middle of the food chain as well. So I'm sitting here. There are 4 empty chairs. We've got 5 panelists that we're going to hear from today. They are panelists that are already taking tangible steps. So we're going to bring this down to something that's much more you can feel. They're already making the connections that are needed. And maybe they're experiencing some success, some joy, hope, but then they might also be experiencing difficulties, resistance, struggles. These are all emotions that go with change and serious change. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that today. And you may have seen in the report, if you've managed to look at it, it's very broad. There's many, many different ways to get to these futures. And we may not agree on how to do that. And you're going to hear very different views today, and I invite you to listen to these, even if you do disagree, to find out where you feel responsibility and where you can connect on. Because I think one of the themes that's really strong and coming out from both Lisha and Lucas is that we really need to do this together. It becomes easier when we do it together and when we support each other to get to that critical momentum. So just to tell you a little bit about the panel quickly and some housekeeping, I think you will see on the thing, we've got those 5 panelists, but we've got 2 parts to the panel. The first will look at how do we get more tangible. Let's hear some of the examples from our panelists. And the second part will be, having heard those examples, how do we grow this work? How do we improve its influence? And how do we do that together? What connections can we make? So that's what the panel discussion will be about. We're going to take questions from the beginning. So you can log into menti.com, and there's a code there on your screen that you should see behind me. If you haven't got a Wi-Fi pass, it is Mansholt 2022, and you can go Universiteit Wageningen. And if you want to tweet, there's a hashtag there, hashtag Mansholt Nature. I'm going to start the panel now with the paired discussions. I'm not going to bring on these chairs, I'm going to remain empty. And I'm going to start with Afi, in sticking with the lovely dedication we had from Lisha on the next generation. Afi, I welcome you to the stage. Please do come. Afi, she represents the Dutch National Youth Council, and she has been very actively representing the voice of youth in biodiversity and food systems, both in decision-making processes in the Netherlands, as well as at the UN Food Systems Summit that happened last year, and she will also be representing us in the voice of youth at the CBD COP later on this year in Montreal. Afi, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you to first of all, actually I'm going to ask you two questions. I'm going to first of all ask you to reflect on some of the exciting and inspiring things you can see in your youth networks, moving towards the nature-positive food that Lisha talked about. And then after that, I would also like you to reflect on how you work with government, how youth and government could do better together, and where you connect, what you heard from Lucas today. But first, let's hear about your examples.
Yes, thank you. So I've been a youth representative for almost 2 years now. And in this job, I have been able to speak to some amazing youth about the topics of both nature and food systems. And something that I experience a lot is that these youth are eager for action and they are open for change. And that's something that's really interesting. I think that also reflects my generation well. But what I see that regardless of their action-oriented nature, there is a need to feel connected to the topic before being able to act upon it. And I think that's not only for youth, but that's also for just the general public. And in the sense of biodiversity, I think that means that we need to know how biodiversity is having an impact on our lives. Like, how is nature decline linked to our personal lives? So that's first of all, like, we need to connect, be closer to nature. And if we're able to connect people again and youth again to nature, we're able to create a big movement and create a big movement such like the climate movement. Because I know it's possible, because we see many, many youth very active for a push in climate action. So I know it's possible to create such a movement within biodiversity as well, but it's a little bit silent yet, actually. But one of the ways I do hear a lot of good voices are from young farmers. So when I speak to young farmers, they want to transform. They understand their land and they love their work and they're eager for transformation. But the thing that's stopping them is support from financial institutions and from the governments. So linking back to the governments directly is, I loved how you say that we need to work together, because I do really think that's the essential point. It's, first of all, you said we need to care about food, and I think we need to care about nature, like connect both of them together and really feel that we are part of nature. And as you brilliantly said, we protect nature for our own sake and not for the planet's sake, of course. And in the sense of farmers, we need governments to create long-term action plans for them, being able to transform and being able to have their work in the future, and the same for financial institutions to create loans. And lastly, we need high institutions, governmental institutions like the European Union or the United Nations to declare a biodiversity crisis, because that's exactly where we're at. And I think that's the moment where youth and governments can play a role together, because we're often, the burden is put on our shoulders while we're not the persons in charge. So we often look to governments to create our frameworks, and then we'll step in to create action.
Thank you. Lucas, do you want to respond, especially around the long-term vision and the action plans that...
No, absolutely. I mean, is this working?
Yeah.
Good. I think that I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what is happening now? The transition and the legislation that is being put into place now is not. It's not going to take effect from next year. It's not going to take effect from the year after. As anyone who works with nature, any farmer who works with soil will know that these changes take time. Building carbon stocks in soil that takes decades, and so we have to make sure that the conditions that are set now are there to get us, so that the next generations, as you said, actually inherit the fruit of what is being created now. I think one action that I think is a very, very exciting one, and the Commission is going to make a legal proposal for that at the end of November, is on carbon farming. That I think is going to change very much the way farmers get support, because they will be able to get a reward, a financial reward for farming land in a way that is not good just for their yields, but also that is good for the soil and for the climate. And as it happens, carbon farming also has really strong biodiversity co-benefits. If you re-wet wetland or peatland, you store a lot of carbon, but you also create an ecosystem which is very rich in biodiversity. So that's the kind of legacy that I think we should be building, and that we're trying to build. And I repeat, what matters is that actually everyone sees that this is not just a philanthropic thing to do for the biodiversity, but it also makes much sense for the incomes and for the long-term resilience.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to invite the other three panelists to the stage so that they can also have a say in all of this. Please do come up. I'm going to introduce you when you're up here. Right, so sitting next to me we have Julia Rido. She's the Policy Officer for Agriculture and Food Sustainability in the WWF Europe office. Next to her is Manfred Arben. He's Global Vice President of Science and Technology for Foods and Refreshment at Unilever. And at the end there, we have Alex Datema. He's a dairy farmer himself and also the chairman of Boerennatuur Netherlands, which brings together around 11,000 farmers to support nature in agricultural landscapes. So welcome to everyone. And I am going to kick off with a little bit of staying in the food environment and healthy and sustainable foods, and with the consumer now, so lifting a little bit back from the farmer. We'll come back to that now. But Julia, I'm going to ask you a question, because your work is very much focused at some of the sustainable food systems law that Lucas, we heard from him about. What about the planetary diet? It's an important component of this, and we've been talking a lot about people's lifestyle. We've heard that from both Lisha and Lucas. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this is and why you think it's important in terms of nature positive? Just make those links back. Give some examples if you want.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for inviting WWF and for inviting me to this discussion. It has been very interesting. So WWF is working a lot on planetary diet, because which are diets that are composed by different kind of foods, especially that are considered good for the planet and for the people. So healthy diet, but also sustainable for the earth. And you can figure it as composed by half of fruit and vegetables, and then whole grains and limited amount of meat and dairy. But what is important that they can be customized according to the cultural context. And what is more important that our work, especially with young people, with, for example, our project that it is the Eat for Change, to try to engage youth and in general European citizens to try to think about this planetary diet, is that shift consumption is one of the essential elements to achieve a transition for more sustainable food systems. And what we are trying to do is not to achieve this shift in the consumption, not only providing more information to the consumer, and so giving all the burden to the consumers, but also trying to influence what all the contexts and the social context, the political context, and the economic context that are around the consumers, in order to bring the consumers to have a more healthy and sustainable choice. We can say that we cannot really say people what to eat. Is true, because the freedom to choose is still there, but actually we are already doing that with the current system. So it's really a matter of changing what is already influencing this kind of system and this kind of choice to push towards more sustainable choices. And that's what we are trying to do. In terms of example, for example, we are also working a lot with WWF has different collaboration with companies. For example, Tesco is one of these companies, and the WWF UK, for example, elaborated a WWF basket that contain a series of proposals to help companies to halve the environmental impact of their average basket. So I think there are concrete examples. We have collaboration, and there are companies that are willing to have this approach. Yes.
So one thing that I'm picking up is that this is a lovely way you were saying you can't connect. Well, that you need to connect people and youth. And I think something like the Eat for Change program could be one of those, or in fact any food initiative, and people like eating food. I don't know, I do. But any food that connects you with nature is really great. So I'm going to stick with, before we come to the farmers, I'm going to stick with the food industry, because Lucas made a case that this cannot just be a wish. We need to actually get a business case down. And Unilever has been quite clear that there's a business case to be made for sustainable products, for nature. Manfred, so I would really like to ask you, to tell us, what makes you feel that this stretches to your core business beyond corporate social responsibility, and why you're making this move.
Yeah, I think one thing is it's not only our individual survival. I think any business cannot survive if there is no more planet to operate on. So it is not a kind of independent thing, and we see that already in the incredible inflation of cost in agricultural commodities and others, which is directly driven, of course, also by war, but also by natural disasters, etc. But I think more fundamentally, there is no, certainly in our belief, no trade-off to be made. And I think we've been stuck in this idea of a zero-sum game that, if you win on one area, you lose on another. So if you win on making profit, you're probably doing something bad for the planet, or if you want to do something good for the planet, it will cost you profit. And we see that's not the case for a number of reasons. Consumers want responsible products. But to be honest, that's a very small part. Most consumers are not the same people as they are when they are citizens. So as citizens, they have a very high ethical standard and very high idealism. But when they make a choice in front of a shelf, you know, there's both economics and psychology are the dominant two science areas that drive their choice. So the key thing is to make these things not unrelated. And I can give an example. And there's pressure in the, let's say, in the financial world. We had one investor in the UK, Mr. Terry Smith, saying, you know, this nonsense that Unilever talks about a purpose for mayonnaise. There's only one purpose for mayonnaise, and that's to make a nice salad. Because with our mayonnaise brand, we push very hard for reducing food waste in the home. So we basically say, you know, by giving people inspiration how to use leftover foods and turn it into a meal with a dollop of our mayonnaise, we can actually sell more mayonnaise on the one hand, but on the other hand also reduce food waste, and we're quite successful in the US doing that. Moreover, if we reduce the fat level in our mayonnaise, vegetable oils are a very nature-intensive crop. So if we can reduce the amount of oil, it's healthier, it's better for the planet, it's more cost-effective for us. But the trick then is, of course, to make the consumer experience exactly the same, so people don't want to lose on that experience. So there doesn't have to be a trade-off. In most of the cases we see there is actually no trade-off. Our brands that commit to doing the right thing, and of course have to then be very transparent and held accountable by society, NGOs, governments, they do better than the brands that don't. So there's no trade-off in that sense, I think. Okay. But I would like to say, and I agree with Lucas, that, you know, we are fortunate to live in democracies where we can't tell people what to eat. But also to your point, we've been telling people what to eat, and we've been changing people's behaviors. You know, before we invented shampoo, I don't think people would use shampoo. Yeah, so we have a role to play also as commercial companies. And for instance, the example is what we're doing with meat replacers, because, you know, the elephant in the room, as we call it, is the fact that we know what is wrong with the food system. We know where the most damage is done. It's monocropping. And it's the amount of food that's actually produced for animals rather than for people. And if we rebalance that can help a lot. And we see that you know, in Belgium, for instance, 1 in 3 burgers in Burger King is now a vegetarian burger. So people do make that shift if they don't feel they have to sacrifice a lot. And I think you see that with veganism in Western Europe. It's still very small, but it's in a tipping point situation. You see more and more people making that choice. So with the right incentives, and then coming back to the economics, I think the key thing, the role of governments to play, is to make sure for fair pricing. You know, companies are asking for fair pricing, are asking for carbon taxing. So we create a level playing field, which then drives innovation to do the right things, because people are not intentionally doing the wrong things. It's just easier, cheaper for them to make the wrong choices in the whole chain. You know, farmers don't want to kill the planet. We certainly don't want to kill the planet. Consumers don't, but collectively we do, because the wrong incentives are at play, and that's because we actually have created a system collectively that stimulates the wrong things.
We're going to be talking about that quite soon, and I'm just going to turn to the production environment now, but let's hold the thought and come back to the economics and cost of food, because we will definitely be talking about that. I see questions coming in on that. But let me give the floor to Alex. You know, what we're asking farmers to do is really putting radical new demands on them, and you know, it's both in how they farm, we're asking something, but also how they shape the landscape around them and how they work together. So we're really asking quite a lot. And I'd like to ask you 2 questions so that we can get to the second part. But I'd like to first of all ask you, you know, I introduced you saying that you work and bring together 11,000 farmers. What are the types of nature positive inspirations that you are seeing? Experimentations, what gives you hope about the nature positive stuff? That's the first question. And then next, to turn our question to like what are the struggles? How can we amplify this work and make farmers who actually want a nature positive future and want to farm like that, how can we support them better? So, yeah, 2 questions.
Yeah, thank you. Very large questions, I think. Maybe I should start with explaining what boeren natuur, farmers and nature is. In English, in farmers and nature, is we organize the 11,000 farmers in the Netherlands who take part in the agri-environmental schemes, and 11,000 is about 20% of the total of farmers we have in the Netherlands. And they all take part in the agri-environmental schemes. It means they do meadow bird protection or arable bird protection, landscape restoration. In the past, we had an individual system where the farmers were an individual base took part in the scheme, and now we have the system so that you can only take part in the scheme if you are a group of farmers, because we think if you want to restore a landscape or create a habitat, you have to do that on the landscape level. You cannot do that on the farm level, you have to do that on the landscape level. Another what works very good is that we try to make the farmers aware of that we are trying to reach a goal. So they are not there in the scheme to carry out a measurement, delayed mowing or herb-rich grasslands. We have a goal with that herb-rich grasslands, that's to feed the meadow birds and to make sure that they reproduce enough young meadow birds. So we try to make them responsible for the goal, and that means if you feel as a farmer responsible for a goal, you try to look how you can do it better every year. And if you are responsible for carrying out just one measurement, you just do the measurement and that's it, and you get paid for the measurement. So what we do, try to make them responsible for the goal. That means that they try to think about how to reach the goal, and they learn from each other how to do things and how to do things better. And I think that's what we need in the whole change in the food system, that we take that we agree on the goals that we have, and the goals can be and must be ambitious, but also that we have create the spaces for farmers to learn to reach how to reach the goals. And for meadow bird protections, we already know a lot, so it's quite easy for us to organize it. But if you want to create landscapes and more biodiversity, there's a lot to learn, and how to combine a high food production, because we need a lot of food, high food production with biodiversity, with a beautiful landscape. There's so much to learn, but I think if you do that in small groups of farmers who take responsibility for the goals we have to reach, then they will be much more able to learn from that things. You know, that's how it works. That I think we should work it in such a way. What are the main struggles at the moment is that we have a lot of farmers. There are more farmers who want to join the scheme in the Netherlands than there is money. So there are 11,000 farmers in the scheme. There are more farmers who want to join the scheme, but there is not more money. So that's one of the burdens. But I think the most important thing that we have to do is that we have to realize that farming is more than producing food. We also produce a landscape, we produce biodiversity, we produce clear waters, but also we can help with solving the climate problems with carbon farming. And we have to find ways that the farmer can earn money with that kind of work. So I always say, if my neighbors want me to create a beautiful landscape and they pay me 10 cents more per liter milk, the most incentive I get at that moment is to produce more milk, because I get more money for more milk, so I produce more milk instead of producing a great landscape. So if you want me to create a beautiful landscape, you have to pay the farmer for the landscape. And I'm very glad with what Lucas said about the carbon farming. If you want to help farmers store carbon, pay them for storing carbon, and not say, oh, you do it well, so I give you more money for the milk or for the potatoes. No, pay them just for carbon storage. So that's what they are going to do, and that's what they are going to do best in that way. So I think what you really need is to change in the system, that we look at farming not just as food production, but also as production of biodiversity in a landscape, and be prepared to pay for that landscape and to pay for that biodiversity.
Thank you, and that's talking very, very much to the connected communities and the biodiverse landscapes, and how we can start building these stepping stones by actually focusing more on what we pay for and what we pay the farmers for. And there's a question on that here. So before I revert to maybe you to talk a little bit about the carbon farming, because there's also a question on that, I'm going to ask you about transitions, because on the banner, in fact, you can all chime in, by the way. I'm going to direct the question to Alex, but please just, signal to me if you want to come in. So on the banner that you see over there, you see people pushing a ball up a very mighty hill, and it's rolling the stone up the hill. And perhaps the one thing where we miss each other quite often is that we either create this vision that you see on the right-hand side of the ball, or we're actually pushing the ball in the system at the very bottom of the hill. So how do you create these stepping stones so that you can get the ball over the hill, I think, is the question. And they're asking here about, can we do that in the eco schemes, bronze, silver, and gold? Actually, that's maybe a question for you on the eco schemes.
Well, on the eco schemes is a way to support this, that creates the... I'm going to turn around. I think it's the thing that is highlighted on the left-hand side. That's an enabling. That's one of the enabling conditions. Eco schemes are not. They're not the solution. They're there to support farmers. They're there to support if farmers want to, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from cows by supporting cases where the market is simply not intervening, which again in the greenhouse gas emission reduction would be a good example. They can support farmers in, we were talking about carbon farming. That's a fantastic concept. It's a absolutely no regret solution. It increases farmers' incomes, it increases carbon stock, it increases biodiversity, but it also is an administrative system, which means that every farmer who will want to participate in this will have to fill in some kind of a form, will have to know how to actually do this. That farmer will have to know whom to ask for help. And this is where the role of public money comes in as well. This money has to be there to help farmers to guide them through this process and help them with the administration and equip them with the knowledge. So I think that that really is the role of public money to support this transition to make it happen. And then the private money will play its role in the voluntary carbon certificate market, and Unilever will be very active in that as well. But the foundations are in helping farmers to get there and see that it actually is an opportunity and see that it can be done.
Okay, I'm going to go back to you because this is something very similar to what you were talking about, I think, and I'd love to hear about your stepping stones and how they agree or match up.
What we in the Netherlands do with the ecosystem systems is that we have a bronze, silver, and gold. So a farmer can choose out of different activities to join the eco schemes. If he does that for a little bit, he gets a bronze. If he does that a little bit better, he gets silver. If he is really high up, he gets gold. That means if you have bronze, you get a little money. If you get silver, you get more money. And if you have gold, you score the best. What we try to do with that system is that we want to challenge farmers to look what is possible on the farm, not just say, well, you have to do that and just look the other way and wait if he has done it, but we try to challenge them to do more. So we build it up so that farmers, and it has more opportunities because there are farmers who are hesitating to joining the scheme. Well, we try to take them within the scheme so they can start at a low level, because we know from experience that once they try it, they mostly will do more in the future. So it's very important that they come with the eco schemes, that they try to do it. So they can start on the low hand, they can start with bronze, but there are people who are much more advanced and to know exactly what they can do on their farm, and they want to score gold. And we tried this in pilots before the new CAP started, and we did it in competition with farmers, and there was no money involved, and then still farmers want to be gold. So even if there is not really a reward, just a gold medal, they try to do more than the neighbor. So if the neighbor is silver, they try to do a little extra so they can score gold. So I think we have to use that kind of mechanisms that is just in our brain. That's how humans react on things, on silver, gold, and bronze. We have to use also that sort of mechanisms to challenge farmers to do more than they think themselves that they can at the moment.
And for these, do they all fit into the system, into the legal system? So your bronze, silver activities, do they fit into that legal system?
Well, that's because it's very difficult to make it all just fit in, and that's what we have to work on the next years to make it more better working. So there's a lot of hesitation at the moment because not everything is clear yet about the cap and all kind of discussions about nitrogen in the Netherlands. So it's a bit of a difficult year to get farmers really enthusiastic about this. But I think if you are 2-3 years ahead, I think that we will be able to get it working really well within the cap, and that farmers are joining it great. Yeah.
Okay, and what are the just lastly, quickly before we jump off the farming, what are the kinds of things that you would want to see in a more flexible legal system or put in there? What are the types of examples that you would like to see from a nature positive perspective?
What I think what we need is as farmers is that we can be working on goals instead of measurements. We have a lot of when people are thinking about how we want to change farming, they often try to tell the farmer how he has to run his farm, and that's not what we are looking for. What I'm looking for is that if we want a beautiful landscape, describe to me how do you want the landscape to look, and I will make sure that the landscape looks that way if you give me the opportunity to do it. So give a farmer a goal, and he will find the right way, the right tools to make it on his farm work.
Okay, so that's what Liesje was talking about the ingenuity and craftsmanship of a
and I think that the communities, she was talking about, the connecting communities, I think that's really, because the citizen and the consumer is a big difference. So we have to bring them together in a way. And I think we can do that on the local level when the farmer is in contact with the consumer and the citizen on his farm. It's completely different than you do that in a hall like this.
Absolutely. So we can come back to that, to connecting citizens and consumers, and also to thinking about some of the true cost of food. What do you think of that, the food pricing and how consumers are behaving? We heard from Manfred, for example, that people will still take the cheapest food, and we heard from Liesje, well, we must make the cheapest food easier to get, the cheap food good. And we also heard from Lucas that there are plans to do this. What are your thoughts on the true cost of food and how that works?
So you basically outlined already everything, and I'm very happy that Lucas said that there will be some measure about that, because so for example, for the Eat for Change, we recently ran a consumer survey that say actually that the price of the food is still one of that is quite straightforward and logic. That is still one of the first element that the consumer look at when they buy food. And of course, we really have a need to make the most sustainable food and the most healthy food also the most accessible one and the most affordable one. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to change consumer choice. And in order to do that, we really need to think how to include the true cost of food within the price. And we have been saying that the price of food should really take in account of the externalities of the different processes in the supply chain. So we should be able to reward those that are producing positive externalities, like farmers who produce in a very sustainable way. And on the other side, we should really try to disincentivize negative externalities also through the price scheme. And so I think acting on price is, if we really need to trigger a change, I think it's really, really important. And if we look at the current, we are in the middle of a price crisis, a food price crisis. But if we look really into that, we can really see that it's something that is coming from the actual system. So that is very linked to fossil fuels and the increase of price of fertilizers. So in order to be more dependent to this kind of shocks also in terms of prices, we need to be more independent from fossil fuels and become more sustainable.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to loop back then to Manfred, because you talked about the level playing fields, and I think there's something about that in internalizing these externalities. What is your take on making food more affordable?
I think it's incredibly important to account for the externalities. Otherwise, you're just kidding yourself, and it's like it doesn't work like that with your kids either. So in the end, the cost is the cost. I think the problem with that is, and that's that's a huge problem also for politicians, is you can't do that as a single country. You can't do that one by one. So I think the EU has a massive role to play in that space. In how do we get to a system that creates the right incentives, not the wrong incentives in terms of subsidies, but also in terms of taxing or cost. Because I think most of people in the industry are looking for a level playing field. You can run on idealism as a company only for that long until your shareholders say, "Thank you very much, great idea, but I put my money somewhere else," and then you're out of business, and then you cannot do the things you're doing that are right, because you then again stimulate the bad actors to continue to do the thing. I, for instance, think with the whole conversation about farming in the Netherlands, which is very intensive, we know that. But the worst thing you want is actually very good local practices to then be replaced by worse practices elsewhere, just because you solve a solution in one part of the world. So we really need to think systemically. So yeah, it's a huge, but a collective conversation is critical. I think it's, one of my favorite slogans is, if you think you can do it alone, you're not thinking big enough. So you really need to and there's no easy answers there, but it's really working together. And I think it's interesting to see that in very many cases, as far as I can see in the food industry, actually the industry themselves are pretty progressive. So what you don't want is that actually that's held back, if most of the people want to move forward. The other thing that you remarked triggered a thought which I found very, very relevant, is that you said, like, you shouldn't stimulate more milk production just by doing the right thing for the environment, and then you're doing the wrong thing. And I think what we are also thinking about is, and it's almost a more philosophical point, is how can you even more decouple economic growth from volume growth? Because the fact that we can drive in the food industry volume, let's say in meat or something like that, we drive growth only by volume, is because the price is too low. It's just one or the other. So the value perceived by the consumer is decreasing. So then you produce more to make the same money as an industry. And that's the wrong thing. So how can we turn this non-product value into a value? Now, branded companies like us, that's our job, because that's why people pay more for a brand than the cost of the product. But we need to think in this way. How do we translate regenerative agriculture to something that is meaningful for a consumer? And for instance, then the link between better for people and better for the planet is an important one. Very few consumers will buy something because it's better for the planet, unfortunately. But they will buy it if it's better for them. If they know it's actually helping their health. And if we can make that link, like with Future 50 Foods and those type of thinking, we need to be very creative. But that's, again, it's a collective enterprise.
Okay. So we're hearing a few, we must reward practices, not volume. We're hearing a similar argument there. I'm going to come to this side to turn to Lucas and Avi next. But Lucas, do you want to respond to some of the things that have been brought up here around legislation? And
absolutely. Thanks. Thanks very much for that. I think you said one thing that I so strongly believe in, and that is use the word value. And this is what we need to create. That's the whole point of the legal proposal coming next year on sustainable food systems. We need to be able to create that value not only at farm level. We of course create it at farm level, but we keep adding through the value chain. Whether it is how the food is transported, from how far it comes, how it is packaged, whether it is better equipped to actually stay on the shelf for longer to prevent food waste. By the way, 20% of food in the EU is wasted. 20% of food, that's 88 million tons of carbon every single year, and most of it is done by us sitting in this room, by households. So that's something that, where we can all make a change pretty much immediately, and think about, how much that is going to change our food systems if we actually reduce food waste just by half, which is the target that the Commission is going to has put into the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategies. But we need to be able to capture this value and transmit it throughout the chain to consumers, so that consumers have, literally can see from fork all the way to the farm. Now that can be done through many ways. That can be done through labeling. If you look at the information that consumers have at their disposal today, and again, you're absolutely right. There's one thing that citizens want to do. I've read surveys. I think 92% of citizens would like to live a healthier lifestyle and have a more sustainable diet, with less meat, with less processed products, and with more vegetables and nuts, etc. But then they don't do this when they go shopping. So, but it's also part of the information that is available to them. What you have on the product is the price, a bit of information on what the product actually is. Then, of course, there's the whole marketing side of it, some sensoric qualities of the product if they can see it, and that's it. And I think that's something that we have to change. And that's what we plan to change. We don't want to create someone used that expression, a logo jungle on every product, but we need a way to transmit this value to consumers. Let me come back to one more point. When the Farm to Fork strategy was adopted in 2020, we always said in panels like this that we can't tell people what to eat. And then what is interesting that 2 years and a few months later, the more and more I say this, the more pushback I get. And people actually, when I say this, they say, well, actually, maybe there is something wrong with the way we eat. And maybe we should have an opportunity to be better informed, and the system should be changed so that it is actually easier for us to, and cheaper, by the way, to have a better diet. So just to explain, from my perspective, I know that I'm incapable of convincing my children to change their diets, and I'm sure that this applies to when telling citizens what to eat. But don't get me wrong, there will be proposals which will stimulate this, so that people can actually make a better choice and translate those values that they believe in or that they carry as citizens into the choices that they make as consumers.
Okay, thank you. And that's a really lovely road in to loop back to what you were saying about maybe some of the more tangible things to connect people back to nature, and not only just to their own health, but actually to what's going on in nature. We've heard some very high-level things. We've heard about farmer practices, about food prices, about values, about diet, about food waste. What of these kinds of things, and we've heard about labeling, what of these kinds of things resonate, do you think, with the youth? Any of this, and how do you think you could take that?
Yeah, a lot actually, because what's really interesting is exactly what everyone is saying, that we can't blame the consumer for choosing the cheapest option, actually. And together with the marketing and legislations, I think it's super logical that consumers and youth choose the way they do. And I love the idea of government making frameworks, because I've heard that there was a lot of resistance to the introduction of the car seat belt. Like, I wasn't around by then, but I heard people said, you can't put me in a seat belt. But I think we can. And I think that's where legislation comes into play. But also, what really speaks to youth is food waste. Almost every conversation about the food system revolves around food waste. And I guess that's because it's tangible, because the youth can do it at home. Like, we're not in the position of power or in a position to pull strings, but we are in a position to either choose with our money, but again, scholars don't have that much money, but they are in a position to battle food waste or tackle other pollution issues. So I love the idea of Unilever as well as tackle food waste and use youth.
Yeah. Great. And you see the way they to connect with
Sorry?
nature. You see the way there to connect with nature and to make it something that's really drives the youth.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Lovely. And the one thing I also wanted to loop back on, because we're going to end our discussion here and actually also take explicit, where there's a lot of questions coming in from the audience, I see. I'm going to, first, before we do that, loop back to you to ask you about, do you see the true pricing in food? You know, Luca said it's going to be cheaper. It may very well be cheaper to actually provide a healthier choice. Do you see that we will have these internalizations, of externalities, and that we can offer these cheaper choices?
I think the pessimistic view is it will be more expensive to make the wrong choices. It might not be necessarily cheaper to make the right choices. That would be great, but that is a bit of a dream, I think. But at least the balance between those two should be healthier. I think in that context, maybe one topic we didn't discuss much about is the whole notion of equity, and particularly if we look beyond Europe. You hear now that Pakistan is to some extent rightfully blaming the West for the ecological crisis they're facing, because their footprint is negligible, but they feel the impact. And I think that is an area where we also need to think about as Europe, is that we can talk about our food prices, but of course the food prices in the rest of the world are also of an issue, and the whole notion of equity, whether that's living wages for the farmers, as well as an equitable access to healthy food, is a major issue, because we recently had a whole group of school children in our R&D center, and I was even, and they were from a socially disadvantaged part of Amsterdam, and I was actually quite shocked about the complete lack of knowledge about healthy food or the choices they make. And even there, sometimes they made the more expensive choices that were unhealthier as well. So it's really a combination of the understanding, but also the economic equity to consider. But I don't think true pricing will make healthy food cheaper. It will make unhealthy food and bad food for the planet more expensive.
If I can add to that, I also see youth from non-rural areas disconnected by the way the food is produced. We don't, children don't know how the food literally grows. I've experienced a group of youth that got a corn at home to grow, and they loved it. It was the first time they saw a corn grow at home, and then they made a labyrinth out of all the corn grown at home, and which was amazing. But I think that reconnecting with the way we produce food will also increase the value and increase our intrinsic motivation to choose the more healthy or sustainable options.
Great, thank you very much. So I've got one question, because I know that you've also got to start running. Lucas is going to a nature-based meeting in Brussels after this. So I'm just going to ask this to you, because we can leave it for you as part of your reflection. You compared the biodiversity crisis as high blood pressure. I like that metaphor, by the way. Although Earth Overshoot Day for the EU was in April, what's needed to change policymakers' perceptions?
That's a multi-gazillion dollar question. I think I'll have to be very, very selective in answering this. I think, to give you an honest answer, I think that it comes down to a few elements. One of them being the income of farmers. I think that's been we have. If I look at how the Green Deal has been progressing, how the green transition has been progressing, I think if you look at the progress that's been made in the energy sector, if you look at the progress that's been made in the rollout of wind farms, in the incredible rollout of rooftop panels. If you want to order a rooftop panel, a solar rooftop panel now, you have to wait a year to get one because everyone wants one. Because there's also a business case for that. So all that is progressing really well. The transport, the transition in transport is also progressing really well. Also because there are very few players in this transition. Agriculture and the food systems is very, very different. We have, if I remember correctly, about 11 million farms in the EU, out of which 90% are smaller than 10 hectares. That's a lot of stakeholders to talk to. And then I hope you will confirm to me, and I think you did already in your contribution, farmers will believe it when they see it. When they see that their neighbor has done this and has not gone bankrupt in the process and actually came out a bit better off on the other hand, they will also do this. So what needs to be done is that we need to show to farmers that it can be done. We need to show to consumers that if they want to reduce their food waste, if they want to have an impact on the planet and leave it in at least the same catastrophic condition as they have it now for their children, they have to change their lifestyle, and it does not necessarily mean that they're going to starve themselves to death. It just means that maybe they can have they can eat a little bit of less meat. So I think that would be the few elements that I would choose. But having said all of this, I put a massive caveat in what I have just said, which is that this is such a complex situation that just does not have a simple answer. So what I have said is a very, very simplified and simplistic answer. It's more complex than that.
Yeah, but you're saying that we need to connect more and need to get in there. So, okay, so we're running out of time now. I'm going to start closing. What you said resonated. I looked straight over to Alex because we were talking about this and he said exactly the same as what you were saying. It's like, take a farmer to a field, show them, they'll believe it. And so, yes, do you want to?
On that? Because
yes.
I was just thinking it when I come to meetings like this. Sometimes my neighbor calls me tomorrow and said, I saw you were in Brussels on social media, and then he asks, well, did it help anything? What did you hear? And I always say yes, of course. But what I'm thinking was, what will I tell him tomorrow? And I think what I can tell him tomorrow is two things. The first thing is that if he still thinks that the world is not going to change the next 10 years, I can tell him the world is going to change. What I hear here of all the people here, but all the people in the audience also think is we need some change and we will make that change. So prepare for it. That's the first thing I can tell him, just prepare. But the next question he will then ask me is, what should I do tomorrow? And then I'm going to be a little bit silent because I did not hear today what the farmer can do tomorrow. And that's what farmers are looking really forward to. They feel that there is going to be a lot of change and they cannot act already. And that's what they are waiting for the actions they can take. And I was pleased with what Lucas said, but also I want to advise him because you have already an instrument in your hands that reaches out from Brussels to every one of those 10 million farmers in Europe, and that's the CAP. We have a common agricultural policy, and I think we should use the cap much more than we do now to support the change that we want, because we have the instrument, we have the knowledge, everybody knows it, and we can reach out from Brussels to every individual farm. So please use that instrument to help the farmers to make the change we need.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That was great. I almost feel like we could leave it there. That was very inspiring. I think that we have run out of time. We are going to wrap up. I'm not going to take any more questions. We are going to ask you also, we've only got a very, very small taste today of the types of actions that we can take. What you were saying is like, what can we do now? And what can you do now? So what we would really like to do is, as you go out, you will get a card. And please take it over drinks. There's a beautiful 3-dimensional tree in the drinks. Be inspired, write on it. There are 2 questions that we're going to ask you that are at the tree. Please do leave that with us, because we are taking this forward into a process where we will think more deeply about this. I want to now actually thank the panel and invite Sjoukje back up on stage to close. We can all leave, and thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you, Jean, and thank you, panel. It was excellent discussion, I think, and I've taken some notes, and I'll try to very shortly pick out some highlights before I'll send you off to the drinks. And what was very clear, also stated by Alex, is that the urgency in this room is clear. But what also was clear, stated by Avi, that perhaps we should explain even more about the urgency too, externally. And that, I think, we should be ambassadors to do so. Another thing that is, I think, an optimistic note is that a lot is happening, and a lot of good is happening. And the EU Green Deal and the biodiversity and the farm-to-fork strategies are good visionary ways to go. But we have to keep an eye on the horizon and keep with the blood pressure. And not be distracted by the heart attack. We have to act. You cannot leave a heart attack there, but keep an eye on the blood pressure, because otherwise we will not come out of these crisis. We will not change. But the good thing is that we have shown that we can change. And if I talk about we, I will talk about the food systems, the agriculture. We have changed so often in history, radical changes, that we can do it again together. But we have to look at some balances, trade-offs, and keep also an eye on the level playing field, because if we do not do that, we will only export our trouble. We should stay with the trouble. And we must all change. And I like the talk about the inner consumer. I don't know if you have seen yesterday the prize for the political drawing of the year. It's 2 pictures, one of 2 people on a plane not saying anything. That was the past, and the other picture is the same people in the same plane saying to each other, well, we should actually not do this. And that is the same with the price. So we need the right incentives to do change. We need, and I like the thought that farmers need a goal, and the incentive need not be money, it can be gold. We all want gold, so that's clear for me. But we also need right guidelines, and there we have a clear question for vision. I think long-term vision, where will we go, when do we all go with agriculture and food systems, but also a very practical suggestion on gap. I'll skip some to keep the pace going. I myself meet many people, not only here, but also in the field, farmers, businesses, all want to change. I think the majority wants to change. So I will get back to the point, let's talk about this and let's be these ambassadors. But to have them changing, we need courageous leaders and we need courageous leadership. And we have to do that together, not only EU, not only member states, but globally, and not only businesses, but consumers. And for that, we need also to invest. And luckily, we've heard, and that's not new to me, but the exact figures were that if we invest €1 in this sustainability, we can 38-fold increase our investments, our return. So change is happening. We are getting there, but we need to get past these tipping points. And I think today has been a step to inspire each other to talk about what can be done and what should be done. And before I send you off to drinks, I would like to ask all the people who have contributed to the Mansholt Lecture today to stand up. Liesje, Jean, but there were more. And I would like to thank them all by an applause. And I would like you to remember some of the faces so that you can go to them when we have drinks and discuss further, but also together. Thank you all for being here. It was my pleasure. And I hope to see you back next year on 27 September on a new Mansholt Lecture with a new topic. And I hope more inspiration towards a sustainable future. Thank you.